Hello, I'm Pastor Hilly. Welcome to Adult Forum. We're calling this episode The Roof Over Our Heads. Affordable housing, sustainable housing, COVID-19, the economy, what do all these things have in common? Hopefully, in today's episode of Adult Forum, we'll shine a little light on that. But before we get there, a brief reminder that during this time of continued social distancing, there is wonderful ministry coming out of this community that we call Faith Lutheran Church right here in Whitehall, Ohio. Ministry that includes this very podcast. If you would like to support the ministry of faith financially, please find the link labeled Giving in the description below. And with that, on to our episode. Joining me today is Ohio native, Capital University graduate, class of 2004, just like myself, and a longtime personal friend of mine. And hopefully, for the sake of this conversation, a guy who is going to help us get a grasp on some really big issues and really big effects across cities in our nation. My dear friend, Mr. Colin Miller. Colin, how are you, sir?
Dan, it's good to see you. Good to hear from you. Happy to be on your podcast, man. How you been?
You're sitting there in the God's country of California. I'm sitting here in southeastern Columbus. It is 21 degrees here. I feel like it's warmer where you are.
You know, it's basically the same. No, it's not. Yeah, we're actually getting some rain right now, so it's a little cooler. We dropped into the 50s. I know that's a lot to deal with here, but it's like shorts weather back home. So yeah, it's good, man. Life's been it's been interesting with COVID, and excited to talk to you a little bit about just kind of the things we're seeing with affordable housing and kind of why it's so necessary in general, and then just right now in a time of COVID when folks are out of work or dealing with family members who are in the hospital and or just quarantining, why it's so important to have a house and a roof over your head. So yeah.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day. I will say, if it was 51 degrees, I would be in a tank top right now. I would be outside in a tank top at 51 degrees.
I think all of your viewers, myself included, would be happy that it's not 51 degrees. So yeah.
I agree. Oh. Now, Colin, you are an Ohio guy, coming out of Tiffin. We met both during Capital University, a lot of great Capital connections here at Faith Lutheran Church. You've been living in California, however, now for over a decade. And in that time, you've done a lot of work in the sustainable housing, affordable housing kind of era. Now, fair enough, Ohio and California are different states. Like, that is a fact. And like, that's a pretty low bar to kind of build a conversation off of. But, I would say, and I'd like to think you would agree, that providing housing options is imperative no matter where you live. And generally, when we look at, these great world religious truths, like caring for people is something that we just need to do. So I'm trying to put together our moral imperative here at the base of our conversation.
Well, you may think it's a low bar, but I think that's actually a pretty important bar to set. I mean, whether you're coming at it from a health and human services perspective, if you're coming at it from a religious perspective, treating someone else like you'd treat yourself, or if you're looking at it just from a financial perspective, from job creation, there are a lot of reasons why housing is important. Even psychology, Maslow, and if you look at his hierarchy of needs, housing's right there, man. So I think I actually started out my career in Columbus, and so I worked for a couple of different companies in the Columbus area who were involved in the affordable housing industry. And whether it's an affordable housing development for low-income families in Columbus or the same kind of development here in San Diego, the location doesn't change the need. Nor does it change the intended outcome, which is just to get folks in a better city, in a better housing situation. There's overcrowding issues here in California. I mean, the weather is better, but so we have a much larger homeless population. Folks from all across the country will do whatever they can to get out here because it's one of those states where you can live outside unsheltered for basically the entire year. It doesn't mean it's going to be comfortable or fun, but I recently was driving on the freeway, and just if I looked up on the embankment, and there were multiple tents set up where folks were clearly, living in them. And so yeah, I think while geographically we're separated by a few thousand miles in a mountain range, the differences between people are people, whether they're in Ohio or in California or on the East Coast, down south, in Puerto Rico, any one of the parts of the U.S. So I think the one of the things that I kind of point out for your viewers and understanding the background you're coming from, when you think about how you want to treat someone else and like what we can do as a community, I think right now what we've seen is just how coming together is really important. Whether it's sharing, when there was a time when we couldn't get toilet paper, and and so you're reaching out to your community and saying, hey, who can spare something to help out this person over here, and sharing of resources. I think what you'll see is just, it doesn't matter where we are in the country. What doesn't matter your, political affiliation, or which seems to be kind of a hot topic right now, or anything. It just, there's a need across the country for quality, affordable housing. And what affordable means, now one of the differences would be what affordable means in Ohio, or maybe in a lower income community in Columbus, might look different from what affordable would mean in a low income community in California. But what surprised me is just that even though, there's a higher cost of living in California, it doesn't mean that there are higher paying jobs for low income individuals. And so you have a situation where, whether it's, Ohio or California or where else in the country, folks don't really seem to have the incomes increasing at the same rates that the cost to build new housing is going up. Yeah. So it's definitely, it's challenging to try to figure out how to, solve that problem, whether it's in, Columbus or San Diego.
And that's a really good point. I mean, I remember last year in May when I moved out here, or 2019 when I moved back to Columbus from Connecticut. And, in my visual world, the price of gas dropped by like $1 a gallon.
Yeah.
I was in town with, I went up to, it was some little restaurant tavern, O'Sullivan's up in Clintonville. And it was like me, Andy Anderson, his fiance at the time, who's now his wife. And I think there was somebody else with us. I can't remember. And so, they were welcoming me back in town. And so, we had a couple drinks. We all had entrees. And I kind of flagged the waitress, and she drops off what I think is my bill. And I look at it, and without batting an eye, I think, that sounds right. And I pay for it. And Andy looks at me and goes, that was the bill for the whole table. And in my mind, that is what I pay for myself if I'm in Manhattan for lunch.
Yeah.
But you raise that really good point. Just because the cost of living in places shifts so dramatically, that doesn't necessarily mean that there are jobs in those realities at every level that allow a completely not linear, but a completely fluid reality for everybody to just shift on different levels based on.
Yeah.
Actually, let me take a step back then. And this is a question I don't know the answer to. Affordable housing and sustainable housing, are those synonymous? Are those synonyms? Is there a Venn diagram overlap? Or are those two different conversations?
Yeah, dude, that is your capital liberal arts education coming out. Venn diagrams, I'm impressed.
Thank you.
I haven't thought about a Venn diagram since capital. Yeah, so they're two different terms, but there is some overlap. So affordable housing is housing that has as we get into the details of it, you've got naturally occurring affordable housing, and so this would be back when High Street wasn't what it is now. As a student going to Ohio State or Capital, you could pick up some relatively inexpensive apartments up and down High Street. and there wasn't any sort of government involvement. It was just that's what the market would bear, and it was the rents were, when we were in school, relatively reasonable. Again, reasonable, subjective. I get that. And in time, market rate developers came in, built these really high, dense. They densified the area. They took out some just absolute establishments. They're super iconic. Like, I think the Dube is gone. It's been gone for a year or two at least.
Yeah. Since I've been back, it's been shut. Yep.
Yeah, and so it's gentrification, pros and cons. I won't even touch that. That doesn't really. It's a different conversation. But what you saw is this naturally occurring affordable housing. It was, it wasn't luxury. There weren't stainless steel appliances, but it worked. It was a place to live as a student where you could study and sleep and get grab a shower and then go to class. That's naturally occurring affordable housing. It would not necessarily be sustainable housing. So sustainable has the implication that it is environmentally sustainable. So it would have certain features that are energy efficient or using certain construction materials that are easily renewable. So you'll see people talk about how their buildings are sustainable, and they'll talk about having bamboo because bamboo grows quickly for flooring. They'll talk about using certain paints that are more environmentally friendly. So sustainable has a lot more to do with the environmental side of construction and housing, whereas the affordable has more to do with the financing, how the building is paid for, and how much rents are for the folks who live there eventually. So, but there is overlap, and a lot of that overlap is a direct result of government intervention. What I mean by that is the building code. Every city sets its own building code, and what we've seen in California since I moved out here in 2007, and the building code has obviously undergone multiple revisions since then. And things that used to be considered sustainable, like, oh, you're going to put in low flow toilets and low flow shower heads, that used to be like a big deal. And now it was codified and it became the standard. And so government can help direct and encourage sustainable, well, either encourage or require certain sustainable features. Like you have to have low flow. I mentioned the low flow fixtures, LED or compact fluorescent lighting to help with your energy offset. So, I mean, there are things that the government can do as well with affordable housing. So there's definitely overlap between the two. Okay. I think, and so within the realm of just affordable, and I'd probably rather cover more of that. I mean, the sustainable side of things, to me, I think is a lot less, might be a lot less interesting for your viewers.
Yeah.
And I think everyone kind of gets the idea of like saving energy.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not really a new concept. So the idea with affordable housing, you'd have this naturally occurring, which is kind of that old, high street of yesteryear example. Right. And now, so the other would be affordable housing that has some level of government involvement. And so the government can do a lot of things to encourage developers to build affordable housing. And one of the biggest, and without getting into all the jargon of different financing and tax credits and bonds, which I've had to give those talks before, and they are as boring and as dry as you'd expect. However, it's also what I do for a living, so I don't find it to be all that boring. Anyway, so the short version of it would be, or the simplified version would be, the government provides incentives to developers to acquire and build housing that charges a lower rent, and that rent is based on the area median income. So like the Columbus Metropolitan Statistical Area would have I think the Census Bureau is a group that does this. They calculate the average area median income for a family of four. And so a family of four could, and it varies by zip code. Like Bexley would probably have a higher average income than other neighborhoods. Yeah. Again, and that's not, and they wouldn't be counting all the students at Capital, because the students at Capital are not actually, they're transient. They don't actually live there full time. Anyway, Again, that's probably getting way too far into the weeds. So anyway, you're going to have different areas have higher and lower average incomes. And the intent of government subsidies or these government programs is to encourage developers to build affordable housing. So housing that if you're making, I don't know, is the minimum wage, is it officially $15 an hour now?
I don't know if that's official. I've heard that like that's where current administration is trying to move things, but as of the point of this recording, I'm not 100% sure.
I thought it was super official, by the way. Anyway, so let's just say that the average is like $15 an hour. If you're making $15 an hour and you're paying taxes and you have to get gas for your car and pay car insurance and rent an apartment and get food and get clothes for your kid for school, like your bills pile up pretty quickly. And if you're trying to rent an apartment and that apartment then if there's no sort of government subsidy, you may be paying more than 30, 40, 50% of your income towards housing.
Right.
If you're doing that, you're not saving. You don't have a nest egg in case there's any sort of emergency, and it's hard to advance and kind of like move up in the world if you're constantly paying the bulk of your income, or more than 50% of your income, as an example, to housing. And so the idea is that the government comes in and helps subsidize these apartments, with the hope that as folks have entry-level jobs, they're able to live near where they work, for example. So you're not living way out east or west or whatever and driving all the way into Columbus to pay for a job that pays minimum wage.
Right.
That you're able to actually live closer to those areas. I mean, they talk about food deserts, and food deserts are basically where you have certain neighborhoods where grocery stores just don't exist because the metrics aren't there. They're a for-profit company. They want to make money, and so they're not going to plunk a Kroger in an area where they don't think they're going to be successful. So there's a lot of, housing is just one tiny piece of the whole spectrum. When you talk about, social justice and, what happens when you have a school in Bexley and then you have a school in a neighboring community, and they have wildly different scores because one of those schools is really well funded because folks in that community make more money, they pay their teachers more, they get better teachers, and it becomes this like revolving door of just more money means better teachers, which means better education, blah, 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 and the divide between folks continues to grow.
Oh,
and so if you're...
And sorry, and another part of that is, especially, I'm glad you brought up food deserts.
Yeah.
You live in a community with a food desert and there's food scarcity. Kids who are going to school who do not know where a next meal may come from or are not well fed are also going to
they're at a disadvantage.
At a disadvantage, and their scores aren't going to be as high, and then it perpetuates these like stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns into, as somebody who lives in South Linden, the closest, I live up off of 18th Avenue, and the closest grocery store I have that's not a corner store is OSU Kroger on 7th Ave.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There used to be one up in North Linden, getting up toward Morse, that neck of the woods. But before I moved back, I think it was a Kroger. It pulled out, and it's a dollar store. It's an Infinity 99 super dollar store, right? So I'm fortunate enough where I own a car and I drive to work, and I'm here in Whitehall and over town.
Mm-hmm.
But for people who are stuck in that neighborhood for a host of reasons, there are people on my street who have to either make their way to High to pick up the bus, or they're getting their groceries at the corner store on Cleveland and 18th, which again, you're spending 50% of your paycheck on housing. Yeah. And then you're also limited to a corner store, which has a 400% markup on everything because they know that you are a captive audience.
Yeah, and there are literally master's degree programs on urban planning that get into this. And so I think to try to keep this to something that is still kind of relevant to the church, I was really impressed to see that your parsonage, I think that's the parsonage?
Well,
your church, okay. But you had that.
Place.
Yeah. I mean, you guys were feeding folks in the community.
Oh yeah, at the parish. No, I get you. Yeah.
Parish. Yeah. Sorry. I don't know my church terms. It's been a while since I've had the green book, the green hymnal. I'm assuming you guys still use the green hymnals?
No, they swapped that out in 06.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Are you ELCA or Missouri Synod?
ELCA.
Oh, there you go. All right. By the way, shout out to the former Camp Moana. It was really sad to see that go. So Lomo, Lutheran Outdoor Ministries, I definitely missed going to that camp. That was fun. If anyone from Lomo is watching, they're probably not. Anyway, hopefully they are.
We have good connections with Lomo historically here at Faith.
Yeah, Lomo, dude, that church as a kid growing up like in rural Ohio, going down to Mansfield for it was like a 3 or 4 day, it was maybe 4 or 5. They drop you off on Sunday and like pick you up on Friday. And man, that was the best. Being in cabins and just like, I don't know. I mean, I made a couple of really good friends, one of whom I'm still in touch with from Camp Moana. But anyway, I was really impressed to see that your church was out there feeding the people. I mean, that's kind of like that what we were talking about earlier of like as a community needing to come together, and just how do you help folks who really need it? And I'm hoping that one of the things that comes out of this pandemic is people putting some stuff aside, like whether it's politics or even religion, but to help each other out, because no one is immune to getting sick. No one's and it's been really eye-opening to see how people have reacted. And so I was really impressed to see you guys out there feeding people, doing a lot of community outreach with folks, not only in your church, but also in the community. Because, I think that's kind of the idea of, being a good Christian or a good person in general, regardless of faith, is that you help out those. If you can help someone, you do.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, like, if you're in a church and the doors aren't open, and by that I mean you're not actively engaging with the community and the realities of happening socially and whatnot, then it's a crypt, right? Like a church with its doors shut that's only inward facing is a crypt. And so like that's always been my thing is like, I came here and in between becoming like really good community partners with food trucks here in town and breweries here in town and Lutheran social services and all that kind of stuff. It's been like, how are we opening those doors? Because A, need is always there. And B, especially in a pandemic, that need kind of obviously increases exponentially, right?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the cascading effect on need, I remember back in March, April, and May of last year, one of the really big things was how do evictions work or can be evicted during a pandemic? And then kind of the ripple effect where if I'm a renter and I can't pay my rent and I can't get evicted, then my landlord is also not getting paid, and then they can't pay their mortgages. And then this kind of like cascading.
It ripples.
Yeah. And so like, I don't know. I have so many questions about this. And the first one is, almost a year later, like, do you know what's going on in that front? Are those conversations still happening, or what kind of support is given across that reality?
Yeah, no, I can speak to that. So we, in California, there is a statewide moratorium on evictions. And you're hitting the nail on the head as far as like, if you're a renter and you've lost your job, so therefore you're not bringing in any sort of income, how are you going to pay your rent? I mean, you still have to buy food, and with everyone being quarantined in their house, you're going to pay your internet bill, you're going to pay your utilities, and unfortunately, rent may be one of those things that people say, "What can I do?" Right. So the burden has shifted from the renter to the landlord. And what we found, at least the last data I've heard as of this airing or taping, was that folks were actually getting the checks from the CARES Act checks, and so they were receiving if they hit whatever income level it was, they were revenue is the wrong word. That stimulus from the government was then go, so now you can pay for groceries, you can pay your rent. Because I don't think anyone wants to, unduly evict someone. At the same time, a landlord can't carry those costs indefinitely.
Right.
And so the challenge has been, what we've seen here is that, there's an eviction moratorium, and I think they've slightly modified it so if there's just cause like destruction of property or like doing something ridiculous, I think that's in there now. I'm not on that side of the business. Okay. But what I've heard is that you've got landlords who are trying to make ends meet as well, and so they're saying, well, what can we do? What can be done? And right now, with the government intervention and folks getting stimulus checks, we're being told that there really aren't that many folks who are not paying their rent. We had the Housing Commission put together a program. I think the county did also. So at the city and the county levels for some sort of income, something to help either landlords or renters. With this, I apologize. I probably should have read up on this before having this video chat. But there was something where they were able to help with those payments as well. So folks aren't necessarily they're not getting evicted because there's a moratorium on it. But landlords are being made whole. On our side of things, so we actually put a program together that if anyone, so we loan funds to developers to go out and develop properties. And we let our borrowing pool know, as a lender, if you're having issues with your payments, to come talk to us. Like, we'll work with you. As of this taping, we haven't had any borrower, like multifamily level, come to us and ask for any sort of like either payment extensions or anything like that. And so when we ask them, like, why is that the case? They're all saying, folks are still making their rent payments. Things are still moving. And it's a lot of that it's a lot of the stimulus from the CARES Act packages. So as long as that happens, I think we'll ride it out pretty well. And with the vaccine being distributed at whatever rate it's being distributed at, hopefully restrictions can start lifting. People can start going back to work. People start eating out and doing things again, and the economy kind of kicks back into high gear. So as far as conversations within the past year, there was a lot of concern, and so we looked at what we could do as an agency to help residents as well as help landlords. Because you're right, just because the resident doesn't get evicted, it doesn't mean the landlord doesn't have to continue to pay their bills and pay their mortgage. So it's been a really difficult situation, but I think at least here in San Diego, we've done a really good job of taking care of folks on all sides of housing. Yeah.
And your comments reminded me, I was watching a documentary earlier today, and it was this guy talking about his job and how he was able to hold on to his job through the pandemic. And he was talking about, like, thank goodness I still had my job, because that's how I make a living, but it's also how I find, a sense of self. And if I lost that, he said, I would have just spiraled into this greater depression, right? So in a lot of ways, I think that the fact that people are working hard to pay rent and to pay their mortgages is actually a really positive psychological kind of sign.
Yeah.
Because if people are like, well, I'm just giving up, I don't care, that's a much sadder reality. But I don't mean that in like sad. I mean that in it's heartbreaking, because we can see this positive thing happening where people go, no, I still got to pay my rent. I'm still invested in life. I'm still moving forward. I'm still getting all these things done.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is there's still hope.
Yeah. And a sense of forward motion. And I think that's like, hope is the engine to move that forward motion. And I think it's really powerful.
It is.
I'm reminded of the joke from the Boondocks, which I will edit for our current audience. If you too lazy to hope, you a lazy fool. And I'm like, I find a lot of truth in that, like, let's make the So that being said, and you were just talking about a number of programs that you've been working at just with what you do. It sounds like, because nothing ever happens in a vacuum, right? Like these programs happen, but they interact.
Literally nothing happens in a vacuum.
Absolutely. These programs are developed like as in relation to the economy, which is always in a state of up and down. But it sounds like there are affordable housing programs and initiatives that are being developed in your area and probably all over, right? And is some of that like top down? Is some of that coming up from city and state levels? Like, or is it a mixture of both?
Yeah, so I think as far as the programs that are out there, because, and this is, even though this has been a very long year, I mean, it'll be, I think it was March 17th is the day we were all sent home and quarantine kind of started. So it hasn't been quite a year, but it feels like a decade. Yep. So with that time frame in mind, the majority of what we do is our funding sources and how we roll out programs, fortunately, has remained fairly unchanged. And I think that's positive because there's a lot of uncertainty in a number of aspects in the economy and people's lives, their jobs, and where you can have some certainty in the market. I think it helps with hope. It helps with investment. It helps people say, you know what, like things may be bad over here, but here, like they're on the home front, they're okay.
Right.
And so for our core business of lending, making loans or issuing bonds to finance affordable housing, I would say we are as busy or busier than we've been before, which is positive. To me, that means that there's money out there from the state, at the local level, that's trying to, keep things moving. And I think they are moving. They're continuing to move forward at the same pace. For new programs, I mean, things in government do take a little longer. They have to be vetted and make sure it's fair to all parties concerned. And so in some ways we work a little slower than the private sector, but we also maybe it can be argued that we're more fair and equitable because we're responsible and are held accountable to the entire population, not just a shareholder of a company that says, oh, well, go do whatever you want, dump oil in the ocean. I don't care as long as my share prices go up.
Right.
Not that actually happens. I don't know. But from a government perspective, we're accountable to every taxpayer, to every person here. So we have to weigh and sift things a little more. But I would say we have, even at the local level, have rolled out some pretty innovative programs to help people stay in their homes, to help landlords continue to receive their payments so they can meet their obligations to their mortgagees, and just like paying utilities, keeping the lights on, keeping water running, that kind of stuff. So I think we have at the local level definitely rolled out some new programs as a result of COVID. At the state level, we've seen more funding that's coming to us from the feds. I think the CARES Act has been huge in helping to keep things moving forward. But it's been in this short period of time, even though again it feels like a lot longer. In this relatively short period of time, we've been pretty innovative.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think so.
I've been saying recently that the past 10 months feels like 10 years. Yeah, because that's, yeah. But all right, so let me take a step back. So that being said, if somebody's listening to this who may have critical housing needs or know people with critical housing needs, are there general websites that help direct people to support systems for families or individuals, or how can people get connected with those sorts of programs? Yeah. That sort of thing.
So I mean, understanding that my most of my info is going to be related to San Diego. I would say in Columbus, it would be the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority. That's the first place I'd recommend folks go. Obviously, like Health and Human Services, Family Services, that kind of those governmental agencies. And I would say, I know Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority, or any of these other government institutions, be patient. There are folks, if you're coming to them asking for help with an apartment or just whether it's, obtaining a Section 8 voucher or getting on the housing list, the waiting list for housing somewhere, be patient. I mean, they're people just like you. They're dealing with the same challenges of a pandemic. And so I'd say just give them some, the benefit of the doubt if they're taking a little longer to get back to you. Everyone's working remotely, and I know that we've been able to continue to deliver, at least in San Diego, to deliver everything we need to do to close loans or issue bonds and start construction. We've done that. But that's because, we had kind of a fairly decent infrastructure with, everyone having laptops, we can all work from home. And with so much of what we do being electronic, whether it's a Zoom call like this, I mean, I'm in San Diego, you're in Columbus, and we're able to have a real-time conversation, record it, and put it on the web for folks to view later. I think had this level of technology not existed, it would have been the whole pandemic would have been a lot worse.
Oh my God.
And so for folks in Columbus who will be watching this saying, hey, where do I go? This idea of low rent sounds great. The HUD website would give you HUD is a housing and urban development. So that would give you a much broader overview of affordable housing programs in general. But for the local level, I would say the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority. And again, forgive me, it's been gosh, how many years now? 07? Yeah, it's been a while since I've been in Columbus. So there may be other groups to reach out to. So yeah, that would be the first one I'd say to go to.
And so what I can do is I'll look up the HUD website and the Columbus Metro Housing Authority, and I'll put those in the description below for anybody who just may be interested in okay, what is this about, and who may know people who could benefit from any of the programming provided by those organizations. Yeah,
that's cool. That's very cool.
Like how I point to the bottom of the box. That's about as fancy as I get. I don't have any CGI, but I can point.
That works, man. That works. No, this is I think it's however you get the message out there. I mean, since you're not able to meet with your church members every Sunday in person, this is kind of the next best thing. And so I was kind of curious for you, obviously housing is important. You need to place a shelter and a roof over your head. I want to kind of curious too, from your perspective, what challenges or what's your experience with COVID and staying in contact with your parishioners, your flock, so to speak? How do you do that? What have been some of the challenges you've experienced?
Yeah,
can you even do communion?
So the only time we've done communion since March 15th, which was the third week of Lent last year, we did it Christmas Eve. I bought an FM transmitter, and we did kind of the whole the typical Christmas Eve lessons, carols, and communion kind of setup. But I titled it Cars, Carols, and Communion. And this is our sanctuary. We have this kind of balcony overflow area, and on the back of the balcony there are these windows that overlook the parking lot. So if here's the window, I had everybody park facing this way, and I was in the balcony facing this way. Everybody tuned in on the radio dial. And we did lessons and carols. I got a buddy of mine who is a ringer, who is actually a vocal major at Capitol in '94.
Okay.
And he sang, and then our organist played on the piano, which was in this little area. And we had a reading, sang a hymn, reading hymn, sermon. And then when people pulled into the parking lot, we gave everybody a packet. Each individual had a packet. And the packet was the readings, the hymns, and within that, this little thing about the size of a coffee mate creamer with a little film over the top. And it was a wafer under the film, and then you pull it back and it was grape juice. So everybody had the communion elements in their own car.
That's cool. Yeah.
And I do it, and it goes over the radio, and everybody had communion. We had all this set up. And then Christmas Eve day, we had 5 inches of snow. Jeez. Just wrecked the town. Just wrecked. And God bless it. We had, we had probably around 20 cars that still come out. But other than that, we do every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. here on Zoom, and you can get to that Zoom link either on the church website, or we have an email that goes out every week, and those things are available that way. We're doing online Bible studies, and we have a lady on our Wednesday at 10 a.m. Bible study who is there every week, and she lives in Las Vegas. And so she's up at 7 a.m. her time because she's part of our Bible study, which is,
Oh, that's awesome.
The interesting part, and you and I were talking about this a little before we hit record. Prior to COVID, having church online meant you do what you do on a Sunday morning, and you have like a stationary camera that just kind of lets everybody see what's happening.
Right.
And
right.
now, like, I've rewritten the worship order because it's me and 35 to 50 people, and I want it to be interactive.
Yeah.
I want it to be what we are doing as people, not what I am doing at you.
Yeah, I've got to imagine that would be a kind of a tough thing to figure out, because if it's just a stationary camera at the back of the church, you really would feel like more of an observer than a participant.
Yep.
And so, how do you bring that level of participation into, how do you mean you can hear the reading, yep. But how do you get your sermon to really speak to people if all you see is like your web camera?
Yep.
And which, by the way, this is probably one of the hardest things to do for me with Zoom calls, whether it's for work or something like this. Where do I look? Do I look at the screen, the camera? Anyway.
That's the thing. My friend Jess Martin made the comment when she was on Adult Forum two, 3 months ago. She goes, if you watch a DVD of your favorite band playing a show, mm-hmm. you're watching the connection between the band and the audience.
Yeah.
If the band is now playing a show and you're going to watch it on YouTube or whatever the case may be, or like Zoom or whatever the live form, the band then has to create that connection, but they have to make that connection right there when you're not. Yep. And again, so the way you do that is you have to throw away your playbook and reinvent the wheel. You can't do it the same way. And
yeah.
I think when we're talking about worship and when we're talking about church, I really quickly kind of threw away all of the rules of the game in some ways, because my job isn't to recreate Sunday morning now on Zoom. It's saying, now I'm on Zoom, what can I do in this arena? Because otherwise we're all just going to get frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, your medium has changed.
Absolutely, in every single way. So we're making those connections. We're trying to move forward in that way. One of the things I always wrestle with or challenge myself to is, how do I take things that we always do on Sunday morning and pull them out of the sanctuary so that people can take them home with them?
Okay.
So, Advent, we have Advent candles, and you light, one of the 4 candles, or 1, 2, 3, 4 in order on the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. So getting ready for Advent this year, I had candles made by a candle company right here in Columbus, about 4 miles from where I'm sitting. And I put little labels on them that had the logo of the church, and it says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And I dropped those off, or had people pick them up, so that as we got together on Zoom, people could light these candles as this act of worship at home. So we were doing it alone together.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that when you're talking about that, it reminds me, as a kid, I had this little old record player, and there would be books on record, and you'd drop the record on you and you'd read along. It would say, turn the page. And the record would tell you let's turn the page. And you, as you're reading along, the voice is also reading it to you. Again, a record player kind of tells you how old I am. I guess we are, because we graduated at the same time. But it's the same kind of idea where you're involving the audience more. That's very cool. It's very cool.
The other part of this that I found really interesting, it was probably about 6 months into the pandemic. We have a list of people who are homebound for a number of reasons. Mm-hmm. And so I do my best to connect with them as much as possible. I used to do home visits, but now with so many of them being like 90 or over,
Mm-hmm.
that is the worst case scenario for me to show up there and do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I remember I called one of our shut-ins, and it's probably 6 months into it, just to touch base with her again. And I go, how are you doing with the social distancing? How are you doing with the pandemic? And she started laughing, and she goes, Pastor, I don't leave the house anyway. I don't go out anyway. It is no different. She's like, 2020, 2019, 2018, no difference. Which was A, really insightful, and B, when I talk to people in our age demographic or on either side of our age demographic, and they're like, oh, I feel so isolated and so lonely. I'm like, all right, so let's think about, our grandparents' generation, or anybody who may be shut in or homebound for any reason. This isn't a 10-month thing for them. There are people, like there's a member of my home congregation who is getting close to 100, and she's been homebound for probably 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And can you even imagine if this reality of not being able to go out took 15 years? You know what I mean? And I don't think that's going to be the case for us, but other people, that's been their daily reality. And that really kind of broke my heart in a lot of ways, but was also really insightful to help better understand and empathize an experience that, again, is very different than my own.
So besides some members of the church who may be saying things like, oh, I'm a little lonely, what are some of the more common, I don't want to use the word complaint, but what are you hearing from folks? Is it, besides like, hey, this quarantine thing is for the birds, what are you hearing from people?
There are two main things. One is a lot of frustration. And the frustration because of the social hub that church is for so many of us, right? Mm-hmm. People who miss the act of worship and community, people who miss the friend networks that they've put together and built here at Faith for generation after generation, people who are frustrated because quarantine's for the birds and we're all kind of fed up with it, you know what I mean? And so there's a lot of that frustration. Also, in terms of worship practices, there's a huge frustration around communion.
Okay.
Because we haven't, like I said, Christmas Eve was the first time my congregation had communion since, I'm trying to remember what the Sunday was. I want to say it was March 12th. And since the ELCA, and since like about the late, so that would be 88. So 88 to 91 was kind of the turn on the corner where a lot of ELCA churches started doing communion every week. And so it's so ingrained into our worship practices, right? Prior to that, if it was the LCA, it may be once a month. If it was ALC, maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter. If we want to go back 200 years, if we were in, let's say, Tiffin, Ohio, where there was one small Lutheran church and there was one preacher on a horseback, you would get communion 3 times a year, because it was whenever the circuit riding preacher came into town and brought communion with them. So that may be once a year. But again, for so many of us, since the turn of the 90s, communion's been an every year thing, every
week. Yeah.
And so there's a need for that and a thirst for that. It's like you were saying, and this might have been before we started recording, sometimes you don't know how thirsty you are until you start drinking.
Yeah. No, that was before. And I think to give your audience some reference. So I had a chance to, I think and to speak to what your congregation's probably feeling, what you're bringing up, the social distancing and, not interacting with people. I think as people, you need that. And so whether you get it at church, or in my case, I was talking with some work colleagues, and there's like 5 of us on a call or on a video chat. And we were all just like, wow, it's really good to like see each other and talk and interact. And that, I didn't realize how thirsty I was, so to speak. That was supposed to be air quotes, sorry. How thirsty I was for human interaction until I was like actually talking to some colleagues and saying, wow, like I miss going into the office and seeing these people and, hearing about whoever just had a baby or whatever normal day-to-day things you would normally talk about. I would imagine as a church or as the leader of your church that it's got to be really hard to recreate that social setting virtually.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can think for you is when I think back to my time in, Sunday school or church, whatever, and you mentioned the candles for Lent. I really think that you need to have a hard wooden pew made for everyone, because that. I'm kidding. You think of the thing when you flip down the whole kneeling thing and kneel on it, and always hurt my knees.
Yeah, no, my two previous congregations both had kneelers. This is the first church I've served that doesn't have kneelers. It kind of weirds me out sometimes.
Probably for the best.
I'm reminded of the great drive-by trucker lyric in the song "Late for Church," where they say the seat. The line is something like, "The seat is hard and the back is soft. How can they never get it right?"
Yeah.
That's just a wonderful commentary on like the weirdness of some church practices, Oh, here's the other part of my answer to that. So there's two things that one is frustration of that thirst, of that wanting to be together. And the other part of it is unexpected. Yeah, I'll use that word. Unexpected.
The lightning and thunder? Can you hear that? Yeah, lightning and thunder, man. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Like, this never happens in San Diego. Like, actual thunder, and now like rain and or hail hitting the window.
Huh.
So, these are the end times, Dan.
That's it.
Wow. No, I guess it's rain. Sorry, I'm distracted.
No,
it rains here so infrequently. Anyway, sorry. So you were saying?
There's unexpected excitement because we are recording this on January 29th. 2 days from now will be January 31st, which is our annual congregational meeting. And so when I was talking to the church boards, I said, hey, in your annual reports, we're all frustrated. We don't have to tell people that we're frustrated by what we didn't do, but give a detailed account of everything that we did do. And in every conversation I've had in the past month and a half since having the boards put that together and sending those out every week for 6 weeks now, I get calls every day that people go, I had no idea that through this pandemic we were doing all of these different things. We were gathering gloves for Lutheran Social Services, canned food drives, community meals. We sent money to a congregation in Human-Claw, Washington, to help people who lost their homes to the wildfires up the West Coast.
Yeah.
Hand sanitizer units for a day school in Romania that I've worked with in the past.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, all right, cool. The world's shutting down, but we are, feeding people in our neighborhood. We're clothing people in Columbus. We're helping rebuild homes in Seattle metro area and providing resources in Romania. And I think that that's the thing that I keep hearing on the really positive side is how have we been able to do so much? To which my response is, because you all are faithful people and this is what we're called to do. In all of the Gospels, the thing Jesus tells us time and time and time again, like what we're called to do is to feed the hungry, care for the sick, visit the imprisoned, and make sure people have a roof over their heads and something to eat. And that's providing the basic human needs. And I think that as long as we're doing that wherever we are, then we're doing the right thing.
I agree. I think there's a lot to be said for, helping your fellow man, woman, child, etc. Especially when the thing I see is like we're a country that is so wealthy and has so much to give. When we have catastrophes in various parts of the country, that sun's coming right in. It's weird. It's sunny, but it's raining. The weather doesn't know what it wants to do. I think it's just we're a country that has so much that when we can give to others, it's one of those things that like. I didn't plan to get into this industry. I didn't really know what affordable housing was, and it was through the director of career services at Capital, who happened. I had gone in to talk to him about what I was going to do once I graduated, and he pointed me in the direction of. I was a marketing major, and he pointed me in the direction of a Columbus-based market research firm that no longer exists, but at the time did. And it became an internship, then my first job out of college, and now ultimately my career. But I thought, how cool is it that, able to go into a field where you're helping someone, where you're helping people. And like, I can drive by buildings and go, I was part of that, and you see people who now live in that building. A lot of what we do is homeless housing or housing for veterans. There's a huge veteran population in San Diego. I mean, we've got Miramar, Pendleton, there's the Navy SEAL base on Coronado Island. Like, there's a huge military population here, and so you have a lot of men and women who have served and given the best years of their life to our country, and are homeless through sometimes no fault of their own. And to me, it's just heartbreaking when I was talking to some of the folks who were rehabbing an old building. It was an old hotel, and I was out there with my hard hat on, and with one of the foremen talking about just whatever construction was happening that day. And a gentleman approached me and was like, "Hey, like, how do I get in here? How do I live here?" Right. And talking through the whole process, and he explained that he was a veteran and everything he had kind of been through. And so whether it's sending hand sanitizer to Romania, or working with food trucks in Columbus to help those who are in a food desert, or building housing to help get folks off the street. Like, it sounds, when I was younger, I thought it sounded kind of corny, but really serving others is strangely fulfilling. So no, I think what you guys are doing is awesome. And what the challenges that your parishioners are probably facing, for what it's worth, it's not, other folks, we're all going through it together. Absolutely. So hopefully there's some comfort in knowing that.
And my buddy Eric said, I was talking to him, and he goes, the truth of it is there's always going to be another catastrophe, whether it's a pandemic or whatever the case may be. And Eric said, there's going to be another catastrophe. So the best thing that we can do to prepare for the next catastrophe is help serve and build the communities that we live in, so that we know who we are and have those networks when the catastrophe hits. And he made that comment to me probably 2 months ago, and I've probably thought of that every day or every other day since then. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, because here we are in a situation where we're being forced to socially distance, and stay in our homes, in our little bubbles. And how do you build community when, in the case of, for you, like, how do you continue to grow the church and that fellowship? How do you have fellowship over a Zoom call? I got to imagine it's got to be a pretty intense challenge for you and every other, pastor or priest or holy person out there. Yeah.
On Sunday morning, our go time is 10 a.m. I always have it up at 10 till. I never start until 10 after, because for the people who are part of it, again, like, if you already know who's on, then this is your opportunity to connect.
Yep.
But that makes it even harder if you don't know any of the talking heads in the room.
Yeah.
To slide into that, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's the question, right? Is how do we continue to make the online places comfortable? Because I've done enough traveling, and when I was traveling more, especially during school and whatnot, if there was a Lutheran church, I would show up, but I was the guy who I would slide in during the first hymn, sit in the back pew, and then I would slide out because I didn't really want to talk to anybody. And that's really hard to do if all of a sudden your name pops up on a Zoom screen and everybody goes, "Hey, who is Ethel?"
Well, and when you're 6'7", I mean, and with a North Carolinian accent, that makes it a little harder as well.
That's also very true. But,
no, I think that's true, man. I think the idea of how do you get that outreach. I'm kind of interested to hear how you, as you go through and as we kind of, hopefully around the tail end of this pandemic, as we start transitioning back to meeting in groups again, and maybe the groups are small and it's 5 and then 10 or whatever. I'd be interested to kind of hear how that happens. Are there folks who are listening into your webcasts every Sunday, and who are like, when you finally get to meet in person, are like, wow, like you can put a face with the name kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's got to be hard. I mean, what I've done on a handful of the Zoom calls I've had with my staff is just, we'll say almost like an icebreaker. And I know it feels a little contrived when we've all worked together for however many years, but there's something to be said for kind of like getting past the social awkwardness that you get from one of these Zoom calls. Like it's weird for me. It's really strange to know to do a Zoom call like this, and I know it's becoming the new norm, right. But on small groups it works. But if you're talking to your entire parish or your entire congregation, it's got to be a lot more difficult. So
yeah, I did for the Synod here. I did a online presentation that I made a video and all that. And I think I had close to 100 people on there, and just again trying to talk when there's 100 boxes and I know I can only see 24. And you don't have the audience giving you that kickback. And like me, I'm trying to crack jokes, but I'm cracking jokes into an empty room.
Yeah.
And it's just like, did the connection drop off right when I hit the punchline? Is it not funny? Is somebody offended? And even on a sermon, every once in a while, I try to I write a joke and I think it's really clever, and I try to land it, and I kind of have to watch the screen out of one eye, because like 4 seconds later, I'll see people laugh. And I'm like, all right, cool, that must have landed. But yeah, it's a totally different beast. Totally different beast.
Yeah, I think this would be a really hard time to start out as a comic.
Yeah. But, hey, my friend, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for this conversation and giving us a little insight. Enjoy your sunshiny rain there in California.
Yeah, it is surreal. Like literally, I could see the flash of lightning, heard the boom of the crack of the thunder, and then it's sunny again. It is the strangest thing. So. Yeah, well, I hope all is well with you guys in Ohio, and I look forward to being able to travel back there and see everybody again in person. So,
absolutely,
take care, man. Good talking to you. See ya.